So what we're going to be going over today is the tax rate setting process in the DRA's municipal tax rate setting portal. So we're going to cover a general overview of the tax rate setting process, kind of from beginning to end throughout the year. I'll go over where the interface is located in the software, the general workflow that you'll be following as municipalities, cities or village districts. We'll take a look at the fund balance and overlay calculations, and I'll discuss some of the math there. I'll go over viewing draft and final forms, and then we'll talk a little bit about the DRA approval process. So the tax rate setting process has multiple phases throughout the year. And it started for most of you at the beginning of either the calendar year or the fiscal year through drafting warrant articles in the portal. Now, these warrant articles are what ultimately become your proposed budget. It's what you're submitting as the 636 or 737, or if you're a city, the 6C. And out of that proposed budget, we get the proposed appropriations and your first estimated revenues. Those proposed appropriations go through your annual meeting and they become your appropriations as voted. So that's your 232 or your 22. As for the estimated revenues, later on in the year, you have the opportunity to revise those and you submit the 434 or the 24 with those new estimated revenues back to the DRA. So all of this ultimately feeds into the tax rate setting process itself. The process takes the appropriations, so the money that you want to spend, it takes your revenue estimates, and then it incorporates the valuation of your community, which comes from the assessment web portal in the form of the MS1, or for a village district, the MS1V, and we calculate a tax rate from that, so from those three pieces. So it's essentially appropriations minus revenues to figure out how much you need to raise through taxes, and then we divide it by the valuation of the municipality, and you get a tax rate. Following the close of your fiscal year, you're going to be reporting your actual expenditures and actual revenues back to the DRA through the tax rate setting portal. This is also where you're going to report your fund equities or long-term debt. So what we're going to cover today is just the tax rate setting process itself. Since there are a few pieces to this, it's going to take probably 20 minutes to go all the way through the presentation. I'll try and speed things up a little bit because I know that people are probably anxious to take lunch breaks. So you can get to the tax rate interface either from the tax rates tab at the top of your screen after you've logged into the portal, or by pressing continue next to tax rates right on your home tab. So right as you log in, there's two ways to get to it. Once you look at the tax rates tab, it's going to indicate the status of the municipality itself. Here we're looking at Ackworth 2015, and that green box is telling us that it's ready for a tax rate. And in order to be ready to have a tax rate set, not only does Ackworth have to have everything submitted up to that point, but there are school districts. I think they have Fall Mountain School. Fall Mountain has to have everything submitted as well. So the municipality, as well as any of its schools or village districts, they all have to be ready to have a rate set. So what you're seeing here is an indicator that's telling me that it's ready for a tax rate. And then below that, we have a table just with one entry for right now. You can have multiple draft tax rates during this process, but it will ultimately come down to a single final rate. So if, for instance, Ackworth had, let's say they were looking at several different scenarios, you'd see multiple draft rates here or multiple preliminary rates. And you could view the individual rates by clicking the green arrow next to them, which brings you to the tax rate interface itself. Or you'd be able to print draft or final tax rate reports by clicking the printer icon. So the general workflow for these tax rates starts with your advisor. They're going to be working on draft rates, which is your voted appropriations, your revised estimated revenues, the information from the MS1, and any initial overlay or fund balance, which was on your 434, they're going to use that to create a draft rate. They're going to submit that draft rate back to you guys, the municipalities, and you're going to have the opportunity to go in and adjust the overlay amount, adjust the fund balance to reduce taxes, and so on. You'll review the rest of the rate, so it's really just those two inputs for you, and you'll be submitting it back to the DRA. When you approve it, we're into the supervisor step, so the third step here. A DRA supervisor will review the rate, they'll verify it, and they're going to send it to the director for final approval. And once the director approves it, you have your final rate for the year. Now, one thing that's important to note is you will only be able to get into that tax rate interface during two phases. So you'll see the tax rates listed in that table on the tax rates tab that we saw on that earlier slide. But unless we're in the municipal phase or the final approval phase, you can't change anything in the tax rate, because it's basically, the process is the DRA handing it off to you and you handing it off back to the DRA. So it's just those two green phases, the point where you'll update or review your rate, and then after it's approved. So this is the interface itself, and I'm going to demonstrate this in the software after the presentation. What you're seeing here is a table at the top with 4 separate tabs. It has a summary of your appropriations and revenues. It has a breakdown of your tax base. It has information about your overlay and your surplus, which contains the fields that you'll be editing. And then it has general information about the rate. Below this table, we have the actual tax rate calculation. So this lower section is always visible to you. It's going to give you a breakdown of your tax efforts and the actual components of the tax rate. And then at the very bottom, you have the 3 buttons where you can either cancel and jump out of this interface, you can complete your review, or you can just save your progress. So this is just a close-up of those 4 tabs. When you go in and you view a tax rate, you're going to land on this overlay and surplus tab first. So this is where you're going to see those 2 fields that you'll be editing. That lower table, which had all the pieces of the tax rates, you can actually hide this table. So if you're on a smaller screen, you can use the hide tax rate table link and it will collapse it. Or as you're working, as you change your overlay or your fund balance, you can use the calculate button, and what it will do is recalculate these overlay adjustments, the final overlay, and all the tax rates we see in the lower table. So in this middle part, we have the actual effort. So it's your initial tax effort, your final tax effort, the overlay adjustment, and the final overlay. And then below that, we have the components of the tax rate. So here you're going to see a breakdown of the tax effort for the municipality, the county, the local and state education, and then the total. You'll see the tax base that applies to each of them, the corresponding tax rate, and then the final tax effort. And we'll talk a little bit about why there is an initial and a final tax effort and what exactly the overlay is. So this is that overlay and surplus tab that I keep talking about, because this is really where you're going to be interacting with the tax rates. You're going to adjust 2 values here. First, you'll change the fund balance to reduce taxes. So that originally came from your MS 434. And then below that, you're going to adjust your overlay. So the requested overlay is some amount of money on top of the voted appropriations to ensure that you can meet any obligations, whether they're anticipated or unanticipated, things like abatements, maybe unusually low property tax remittance. It's basically just a small amount of extra money, so you're not coming up short. So you'll make the changes here. You can use that calculate button and you'll get to immediately see the impact to the tax rate and all the components. Now, because of how the calculation works, for some municipalities, this is kind of an iterative process. You might have to experiment with different overlay amounts to get the resulting tax rate that you want. And I'll talk about the math behind that. Now, you don't need to be overly concerned with the math here, but we'd like to take the opportunity to explain it to everybody so you kind of have in the back of your mind how it all works and how rounding impacts this whole process. So you start out with an initial overlay. In this case, we'll just say it's $5,900. And you know your initial tax effort and your tax base. So we've got to pay for $775,900, and our community's worth a little over $15 million. So the tax rate itself, it's a really simple calculation. It's simply the amount you need to raise, so your tax effort, divided by the valuation, your tax base, and then multiplied out by 100 to get dollars and cents. Now, if you follow that calculation out, a lot of times you're going to end up with partial cents, and this is where the rounding piece and the overlay become important. So here we've divided our tax effort by our tax base, and we've ended up with a little over $5.02. So our corresponding tax rate, because we can't really charge fractional pennies, is $5.02. Now, we've dropped that fractional cent, so that the 0.2 of a cent there, which might not seem like much, but when you're dealing with communities that are worth millions or hundreds of millions of dollars, or large tax efforts, that matters quite a bit. It's going to throw your numbers off. So to actually determine the adjustment amount, we're going to reverse the equation. And instead of calculating a tax rate, we're going to figure out what tax effort we need. So in this case, you move some numbers around, and what we can do is we can turn around and calculate how much money we would actually raise through that lower tax rate, so that $5.02. And what you might notice here is that with rounding down that tax rate to the nearest whole cent, we're actually going to come up a little short. So we're going to be about $310 short of where we need to be. So what you would ultimately do is take that $310 and calculate a final overlay amount from that. So that overlay is basically your cushion to deal with this rounding issue. And that the adjustment can be positive or negative. It all depends on whether you're rounding your tax rate up or down. Now, again, you don't have to know all this. You don't have to memorize it. It's simply, I'm just presenting it so that people have an idea of how this works. Now, the adjustment itself is only applied to the municipal tax effort. So this doesn't filter down into local, state ed, county, anything else. It's only going to be the municipality. So let's take a look at the software. What I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up and log into our test portal. And now this is just it's basically a test server. It's separate from the real thing that you guys are logging into. So if I'm using your community, don't panic. I'm not actually going to change any of your numbers. I'm logging in as a municipal administrator, which most of you are. And I'm going to look at Ackworth's in-progress tax rate from last year. So I've logged in, and I'm going to click on the tax rates tab. And here I've got this preliminary rate that's ready for me. This is just a demonstration rate. Basically, to get to this point, the advisor would have reviewed things, created the rate, and then passed it off to me, the municipality, to review. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to click the green arrow next to the rate. We're going to take a look at the details. So this is the details for that particular tax rate. Here you can see I landed right on that overlay and surplus tab. but let's just take a look at what's on these other tabs so you have an idea. We have a breakdown of the appropriations and revenues. So you'll see your actual adjusted values here from your 232R and your 434. And this all has subtabs. So you're going to see all of your municipal numbers that you've submitted throughout the year and that the DRA has approved. You'll see any county tax effort values here, and then a breakdown of your school districts, so your local education, your state education obligations, so any taxes raised for that. And if you have any village districts, they'll be here on their own tab. This tax base tab will give you an idea of what your MS1 looked like. So this is the valuation that gets submitted through the assessment web portal, so a separate website, but the numbers come over here to the tax rate setting portal so that you have all of this, the information you need. And we just have two lines. We see total assessed valuation with and without utilities, because that factors into different pieces of the tax rate. And then if I had any village districts, Ackworth does not, but if I had village districts, I would see their information on it here as well. This is the overlay and surplus tab. So this is the one I think we'll take a look at first. So what you're seeing here is an initial unassigned fund balance. I've voted some amount for my fund balance. I haven't assigned any of it for emergency appropriations. And I have $5,000 as fund balance to reduce taxes. So then it gives me my total retained fund balance here. And this is one of the numbers I can adjust. And then right here, I have my requested overlay. So my initial requested overlay came from my 434. Now, for a lot of you guys, you probably won't be adjusting these values. You'll probably just review it, say it's okay, and pass it back to the DRA. But if we were to come in and adjust things, let's say we bump our fund balance to reduce taxes up, and we bump up our requested overlay. Once you change those numbers, we can hit calculate, and it's going to come down here and recalculate our tax rates. So this is the part where if you had a very specific tax rate in mind, let's say through meetings or some other form of communication, you're aiming for a municipal tax rate that's $9.72. What you would do is you would adjust your fund balance to reduce taxes slightly. You would adjust your requested overlay to kind of target that tax rate. And once you're done, once everything looks good, you're happy with your municipal tax rate and the way all the math is worked out, you click Complete Municipal Review, and it's going to pass it off to a DRA supervisor for that stage of the process. Now again, I can only access these tax rate details when I'm either in the municipal phase, meaning the advisor has just handed me the rate to review, or the rate has finished the entire process and it's now a final approved rate. If I wanted to take a look at a draft of my tax rate report, I can use the printer icon here. And this is going to open the report in an interface that most of you have seen before. So this just gives me a preview, and I'll show you what the actual report looks like in a second. But you can see that it has watermarks on it. It tells me that it's not finalized. So all of this goes away once the rate is finalized. So you can't accidentally print out a preliminary rate, for instance. So let me jump back and we'll take a look at the sections of the report for those of you who haven't seen it before. So the tax rate report is 4 pages, and each page is broken down into different sections. So we'll just go over those real quick. The cover sheet itself has the year and the final tax rate right at the top, so you can't miss it. And it has a breakdown of the tax efforts, the valuations, and the tax rate components for the municipality, the county, for local and state education. If I had village districts in Ackworth, they'd have their own section on this page. And then below that, you just see the tax commitment calculation. So this is all the information that we just saw in the interface. Page 2 gives you a breakdown of essentially all the municipal accounting components that went into the tax rate. So this is where you're going to see your appropriations, your revenues, and any apportionment for the county or any education components. At the very bottom, you'll see a breakdown of your valuation. So your MS1, and if you had a village district, your MS1Vs. So again, this is all of the information that we just saw in the interface. It's just organized into a single report. So I got a question here. Is the municipality's only chance to adjust the expected revenue at the submission of the 434? Can it be adjusted during the municipal or final approval phases? So the 434 is your last opportunity to revise the revenues that you think you have coming in. So that's the revenues spread out across all of your account codes. You submit the 434 to the DRA, they review it, and those reviewed revenues, so the 434R, is what feeds into this tax rate setting process. So the only two pieces that you can adjust once that's done are the fund balance to reduce taxes and the overlay. So here on the third page, this is probably the most important page for you guys. This is the tax verification, or the 0.5% verification. This is something that your tax collector or the deputy are going to have to complete. They'll basically fill in their commitment amounts, any TIF information they have here, and then the net amount after any TIF adjustments. And most of you probably don't have TIFs anymore. They'll sign it and date it, and it's this page that you're going to scan with the signature and upload back to the portal. The last page is a breakdown of your fund balance retention guidelines. So this is where you would see the maximum and minimum recommended retention amounts that the DRA is recommending, essentially. So it'll give you your current amount retained. You can see that at the top in bold. And then below it, the maximum 17%, the minimum of 5%, and a couple steps in between. So you can kind of see where your amount retained falls. If one of your associated school districts had adopted, I think it's RSA 198.4, and they had a retained fund balance, you would see it in a table below your information here. So that won't apply to every school district, just those that have adopted that particular RSA. So that pretty much covers the tax rate setting process. I know it seems like a lot for just two pieces of information. If you run into any issues or you have any questions, you can reach out to your municipal advisor or municipal supervisor. You can find your advisor's contact information in the yellow box right as you log into the portal on the Home tab. And if you have to reach out to us, if you run into a problem with the portal, or if you know what you have to do but you don't know how to do it in the portal, you can reach out to our technical support team. So we've got our phone number right there. We have both an 800 number and a 603 number. You can call either one. You can email us, support@axiomnh.com, or you can go to our support portal.